Hello, and welcome back from lunch, everyone. I appreciate you joining us for session 3. This is the next step we're going to take towards examining how best to do tribal relations. And in this case, what we're really looking at now, we heard about sovereignty, we listened to active listening ideas, and now we're going to hear from a really wonderful panel of people talking about the concept of wisdom and reciprocity, which is what happens when you engage your tribal communities in a meaningful manner. So I'm super excited for this panel. We have one more panelist who will be coming in a little later. But I'd like us all right now to get started. Just briefly, if you could please introduce yourself, what you do, and then afterwards we'll begin our discussion. So I'd like to begin with the first person on my screen is Celso Villegas.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Celso Villegas. I'm Director of Water Resources for the Tohono O'odham Nation in Southern Arizona. I have a lot of things on my plate that I need to do, but my thing that I really enjoy is that I'm a tribal member. I came back home, and we're building a resiliency for water for the future. That's it.
Thank you, Celso. Next on my screen is Cynthia Naha.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cynthia Naha. Currently, I serve as the Director of Natural Resources for the Santo Domingo Pueblo, which is a pueblo located here in New Mexico. I'm a member of the Hopi tribe, and I'm also of Tewa and Ihangtawan Dakota Oyate descent. And I pretty much run a gamut of things. I think right now I currently manage 22 different federal funds. So I'm pretty busy, and I also sit on a national, regional, and state committee, all relating to building that tribal capacity with our partners. Thank you for being here and letting me be here today as well.
Thank you, Cynthia. Next is Shasta. Oops, I can't hear you, Shasta.
How about now?
Fantastic.
Yeah, sorry, I had it connected to the wrong microphone. I am Shasta Gone. I am the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and the Environmental Director for the Palma Band of Mission Indians, which is in Payoncowichum territory in San Diego, California. And just like my colleagues, Celso and Cynthia, I have a lot of different things on my plate. And it's my honor to be here as part of this Wisdom and Reciprocity panel so that I can share with you what I have learned as a non-tribal person about what the appropriate ways are to go about developing those relationships with tribal colleagues.
Fantastic. So you can see we have different states represented, different viewpoints represented. This is going to be an exciting panel. Let's see, in describing the concept you have today, everybody has some time, and take your time. We expanded this panel because there's so much to really discuss here. Thinking about the concept of wisdom and reciprocity, collaborating with tribal nations. I would like to invite Cynthia Naha to go first.
All right, thank you, Melody, I appreciate that. Well, one of the things for me, and sometimes it's crazy and interesting, I often get emotional when I do talk about the work we're doing with climate change and around our efforts to really build those working relationships, and not just with federal and state agencies, but I think even more importantly with our tribal leaders and our community members, because it's imperative for me as the director to ensure that that engagement is there and that we're providing an opportunity for people to share, hear, and listen. Because when it comes to looking at the climatic effects that we've been experiencing here in New Mexico, and more so within the San Domingo Pueblo, is it's really looking at it, as mentioned, I think by Anne Marie in the session earlier, that holistic perspective. So I really believe in the work that we're doing, and with the federal funds that I currently manage, I mean, it runs the gamut from forestry to agriculture to rangelands to soils to solid waste, legal dump sites, water quality, water rights, looking at irrigation and things of that nature. So I really tried to tie in impacts of drought, impacts of flooding and wildfire into our discussions around, when it comes to irrigation season, and looking at, right now we're going into, drought conditions and have been in drought conditions. So what do we do to become more resilient Pueblo farmers? How do we build that capacity where we're able to, if you will, for the lack of a better word, regurgitate that scientific information? So as we're communicating to our community members on what it means to look at these projections that are letting us know come April, we're going to be in a lot drier conditions than what we are now. We'll experience perhaps a degree rise in temperature. We'll also experience that lack of precipitation. And right now, what they're telling us is because we're going through these heat waves, and with little snowpack that we have in our mountains right now, we're getting that quick runoff. And then if we get a cold front coming in, it'll slow it down. But really just the rate and volume in which it's melting is really beyond a level in which we're able to capture, because again, you look at it from that holistic perspective and understanding that, unfortunately our soils aren't that healthy due to overgrazing, and really taking a reapproach to rangeland management and integrating regeneration or regenerative aspects and techniques to building those soils, so that when we do experience runoff, we actually experience infiltration into our soils, to our groundwater, versus just that runoff into our river. So again, as I look at a lot of the things that we're doing and building that working relationship across our reservation boundaries, it's imperative to be able to work with those local state agencies, the federal agencies, building upon what the U.S. Forest Service and the New Mexico Forest Department call shared stewardship, and understanding how does that concept really work when we are limited to the boundaries of our reservation. And really, if we go beyond that, how do we build that collective capacity, so that way, if and when a catastrophic wildfire comes through, that we're working together to either do, the prescribed fires or those traditional fires. We're doing thinning, fire line prep, and all of this stuff to really maintain and reduce that impact of our forest systems. And then even, going beyond that and looking at how it affects our tributaries, how it affects our water quality and even quantity. So I think, for me, when it comes to building these working relationships, it's really integral to have that inclusivity at the beginning versus as an afterthought, because that's something that I always experience is, it's like, for example, I guess the most recent one is the tribal consultation that was just released from the Biden administration, and we only had 30 days to really respond and comment on that. Well, how does that work for us? We have so much other things on our plate. Plus, you didn't even host the webinar till 2 weeks into March. So really, I think it's imperative, for me in my position and the due diligence that I do, not only to my Pueblo community and my leadership, but even beyond that and across Indian nations and Native nations and Indian country, however you want to define it. It's really making that stand and letting our voices be heard at that level, where we're creating that path of advocacy to make changes, to rebuild our Native nations, as it was talked about in the Indigenous Data Sovereignty session today. So I look at a lot of work really having to be engaging, really having to have these sessions where we're listening and actually hearing, and we're being proactive versus reactionary. I know oftentimes, it's hard for us to do that, especially for me sometimes, but I think the work that we do is very prevalent to this day and age. I look at, even our efforts in reforestation activities, and then again, rebuilding those healthy soils as that process of reciprocity, because I definitely feel that we've taken so much from our Mother Earth that it's time for us to give back. And I think the strategies and actions we're looking at implementing based off of Western science, traditional knowledge molded together, is creating those actions for resiliency and adaptation. So again, just looking at the need to really enable that ability to do cross-boundary, cross-landscape management, and understanding that we as tribal nations, Pueblo nations, exist just as much as our municipalities do. So we provide and work hard to provide those services to our tribal members, tribal citizens, ensuring our leaders understand what is going on around our reservation communities and what we need to do to have that active voice. And again, to be that advocate on behalf of our communities, but also to be there in that respectful manner as technical staff. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like next to ask Celso Villegas to talk a little bit about wisdom and reciprocity when it comes to engaging tribal communities.
Yes, Melody. I can't even say they were ripper, whatever. Anyway, so good afternoon. Before I begin, I would like to give thanks to Mother Earth, the Kiwatgacham. Every day through photosynthesis, she converts energy from the sun to make oxygen for us. She spins the water cycle to make fresh water in the form of rain and snow. Her soils produce plants for us and the animals we eat. She provides all the raw materials we need to build shelter against extreme weather. So on behalf of your children, thank you, Mother. It may not be easy to get tribal communities to talk about climate change or climate adaptation planning, but it's important to remember that adaptation planning will not happen without community interest or support. Tribal communities, like most American communities, have different views and questions about climate change. For example, climate change is not real. With all my problems, why should I care about climate change? When will it start? What will it do to us? To understand how tribal members feel about climate change or adaptation planning, you need to ask as many of us the same questions, a survey. For example, do you believe that climate change is real? If yes, please answer the following questions. What do you want to protect? What form of protection can you provide now? What future actions can you take? When do you take these actions? Can you achieve the future you want in a hotter and drier climate? Chances are many of the survey forms will be blank. Before anyone can answer these questions, they need relevant regional information about climate impacts. For example, climate impacts to interior tribes may differ than those from coastal tribes. Most tribal members need examples of adaptation strategies, and these strategies should be sensitive to the community and the region. So let's wait a minute. I'm assuming that you have permission to enter the reservation, or you were invited to talk about climate change and adaptation planning. A big challenge for non-members, especially researchers, is getting on tribal land. More specifically, who do you contact within a tribe to get permission? Every tribe may have different entry points. An entry point is where a non-member can make contact with someone within the tribe. You may have better results if you contact a tribal department or program whose work activities involve water resources, natural resources, human health, public safety, or emergency management. Many tribes have directories on their websites that can be helpful. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Flagstaff and the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals at Northern Arizona University, Nikki's group, are also potential resources for entry points. Okay, you found someone, an individual interested in climate change and is willing to move you through the social political structure of a tribe. Again, I suggest you start at the tribal department or program level. Here are several reasons. Maybe the department or program is currently working on a climate adaptation plan, or climate change is already included in their management plan. If the department or program provides services and outreach to the general public, this is one way to introduce climate change to the people. An example is that when I was asked to develop our climate adaptation plan, the first thing I did is I made cartoons explaining climate change impacts, and then climate change adaptation planning. And I sent these out at the rodeo. We made a lot of copies. We sent it to the general public anywhere we could. Anything there, any function that was having involving the people, we try to get these cartoons to the people. And it really helped because when we had our council meeting, when we had our council meetings there on the radio, a lot of people were asking who made those cartoons. That meant that they were reading it. And that was the point, was to get them in the discussion. You need to find out how much your tribal contact knows about climate change and adaptation planning. If you have the time, educate your contacts so they have a proficient level of knowledge about climate change and its impacts. This will help when you take your discussion to the general public. Tribal communities appreciate having a tribal member or a tribal employee on your team. Develop workshops to provide climate change information. Keep your presentation short. A short, informative video will help. Make your presentations at an 8th grade level. Remember to include department directors because they usually report directly to the elected leader of a tribe. Another reason to include department directors is that a director can ask other directors to participate in the climate change discussion. Hopefully, you will be invited to make your presentations to all the directors and the tribal leader at their scheduled meetings. Before your presentations, discuss your survey questions. After your presentation, ask your audience to answer the survey questions. Make sure you discuss the survey results. This is very important. Make time. The discussion should include relevant regional information about climate adaptation planning, active listening, that's to you, Melody, active listening, and effective note-taking will help you guide the audience in developing an adaptation planning process that can best serve the community. If you're successful at the department or program level, it's time to take the climate change discussion to the people. Tribes may have different political boundaries. My tribe has districts. The Navajo Nation has chapters. Ask your tribal contact about the protocols needed to present to the communities within a political boundary. Remember, some tribes may not have distinct political boundaries. Communities may have scheduled monthly meetings on the weekends or in the evenings. You will have to schedule your presentations accordingly. After your presentations, surveys, and discussions with the department, programs, and communities, you'll have a better understanding how tribal members and employees feel about climate change and what they want to protect. By now, you should be able to develop a draft climate adaptation. A final draft may require more meetings with the department's programs and communities. What you want in the end is a well-developed final draft and a tribal resolution supporting it. And if you say, why a tribal resolution? Usually if a tribe gives you a resolution, you can ask for money to help to implement the plan. That's why it's very important. And then off the nation, a lot of the federal agents will ask, do you have a tribal, you have a climate change adaptation plan? And then you say, yes, I do, and I have a tribal resolution. That's telling them that their tribe wants it. Getting a tribal resolution may take a while. In 2014, my department and consultants from the University of Arizona began developing a climate change adaptation plan. Through 2017, we focused on projected future climate impacts, and potential adaptation strategies, understanding that this plan would change as the climate changes. We spoke to the directors and designated staffs from 8 tribal departments and 2 federal agencies that work on the nation. We discussed climate science, potential climate impacts, and collected their input on potential adaptation strategies. These discussions included current departmental management plans and how each department, program, or agency viewed their capacity to adapt to potential climate impacts. That discussion was very important. 3 workshops were provided to the staff from the 8 departments and 18 tribal programs. These workshops discussed additional responsibilities that departments and programs may incur once the plan is adopted. So as you can see, it's a lot of communication, a lot of talking, a lot of time. Our plan incorporated adaptation strategies from our members and elected leaders. It was presented to the executive branch, the judicial branch, the tribal council, 18 district councils, and 33 community councils. The plan also incorporated strategies from over 500 O'ahu middle and high school students and our youth council. I have a lot to, we wrote the plan for them. In 2018, our tribal council by resolution approved the plan. So the takeaway message that I want to tell you is that I don't know how much time you have, but time is not relevant when you're trying to engage your community about climate change. Because for me, this is what I tell my people about our plan is an investment in our future and in that of our children. So they bought into it and I have their support. So that's nice to know. I have the council support, I have the leadership support, but to me, having your people support you is half the battle. That's my stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Celso. And I see questions pouring in, but I'm going to give the panelists each a brief time to discuss before addressing the questions. So next we have Ms. Shasta Gahn.
So I've been giving the concepts of wisdom and reciprocity a lot of thought. And I don't particularly feel like I have much wisdom to share myself. And it's a hard thing, I think, to, at least for me, to be in that position of necessarily trying to tell others what they should do. I don't feel like I have that kind of knowledge, but there's a difference between wisdom and just knowing something, and I think we could probably all define it differently. In fact, that would be something interesting to see people put in the chat. How do you define wisdom? I'm a little bit funny about it because I also associate wisdom with age, and I don't want to admit that. I'm going to be 50 this year, and I'm kind of like, each year older that I get, the more I push back the age at which you can actually say you have wisdom. So by the time I'm 80, it'll be 100 is when you get to have wisdom. But at the same time, if you have experience, then you have something that you can pass on. And so when it comes to reciprocity, this is a concept that I've taught for years. I spent 14 years teaching in the anthropology department at Cal State San Marcos. And we would talk about reciprocity in the anthropological sense of reciprocal obligations that people have within a community. So, there's 3 types, with anthropology and Western knowledge, it's always about categories, right? So you have your 3 types of reciprocity. You have your generalized reciprocity, your balanced reciprocity, and then you have your negative, reciprocity. And, you know, with your balanced or your general, that's like what families do for one another. Where, you know, and I would joke with my students and I would say, if you take your laundry home for the weekend and you do the laundry at your parents' house, are they going to ask you for money? You know, are they going to say, okay, well, it's $1.50 for each load, you know, and there's a soda machine, but you got to have, you know, you got to have quarters to get yourself a soda for, you know, for another $1.50. You know, that wouldn't be general reciprocity. They let you do the laundry because they know your family, and at some point down the line, you'll do something for them in return. You know, when your parents need your help as they get older, that's when it's all going to come back to them. All of those free meals and raising you for all those years, or paying for college, letting you do the laundry. And balanced reciprocity is a little bit different. The relationships aren't as close. You know, balanced reciprocity is more like when you and a friend make a date and you say, all right, we're going to go to the movies and let's go have dinner before the movies. And I'll pay for dinner, you pay for the movie. That's balanced reciprocity. Or, you know, I paid for lunch last time, or you paid for lunch last time, so I'll pay for lunch this time. And you keep things in balance. And then your negative reciprocity is more like people who don't know each other, and so there's not a lot of trust built up. And what's really going on is that it's each person is trying to get the best possible arrangement. So my example usually for negative reciprocity is when you're buying a car. You know, the salesperson wants to sell it to you for the highest price they can get. You want to pay as little as you can. And you can't really trust when the salesperson says, well, you know, I got to go talk to my manager. I think this is the lowest we can go. And you're like, is that really true? But then when they ask you, you know, well, what's your budget? And you're thinking in your head, well, I can spend 30,000, but you tell the salesperson, you know what, I can't go above 25. And you're both trying to get something out of it. Now, having given you my little mini anthropology lesson on reciprocity, you know, I could ask, you know, if this was live, I would ask the audience, you know, which one of those three, generalized, balanced, or negative, do you think is the most common experience for tribes when they are approached by government agencies? When a researcher comes to them and says, we want to get a blood sample so we can do a study on diabetes. I think, you know, you're probably nodding along and thinking to yourself, yeah, probably negative reciprocity, where you can't trust what you're being told. And there are too many stories about how, you know, researchers or whomever have said, we want to take your blood for this diabetes test. And this happened to the Wallapai people, or it might have been Havasupai, and I'm sorry if I got the wrong one, where they did give their blood for those diabetes testers, and yet their DNA was also used for a study on schizophrenia. And they had not consented to having their genetic material used in that particular study. And so that is negative reciprocity to a T, where the researchers were not upfront. They said what they wanted to do, but they had a hidden agenda and they didn't reveal it. So is it any surprise when we know that of those three types, it's the one where things are being taken from Native people is the most common experience? How can I, as a non-Indigenous person, as a white anthropologist, come into a tribal community and expect there to be any level of trust right at the very beginning of that relationship? Well, I'll tell you, I've been doing research in this region for 20 years, and I've worked for Paula for 16 years, and there are still people who don't trust me. And I don't blame them, because the experience has been more negative over the centuries since colonialism, or currently with existing colonialism. It's been more negative than it has been positive. So what can you do if you are somebody who wants to work with a tribal community? Well, I think the thing to really keep in mind is that if you want to get back to that place of balanced reciprocity, white people have centuries of giving that we have to do before there's any hope of there being a balance. And I think that if you are mindful of that, then the question on the top of your mind needs to be not what can you do for me as a tribal community or a tribal member, but what can I do for you? And if you have a goal, if you want to study, I'll use the example of Megan Jennings and her work from that we talked about in day one. If you're going to work on connecting wildlands and communities, Megan didn't come to the tribes and say, well, here's exactly what my project's going to do, and you have to do this, 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 and this if you want to participate in my project. It was, we'd really love to work with you, so tell us what you want. Tell us what you need. And she and her team came to us over and over again to make sure that they were providing the information that we wanted, that the information was being used in a respectful way, that if there was any confidentiality that needed to be observed, then that was a part of the process, that you may be telling us something, but it's not something we can talk about. You know, like say where there's a stand of plants that are important, you don't want to reveal that if those plants are in a sensitive area. I was so excited that I muted myself. I don't know how that happened. And I can say it can be disappointing because you might be going into that community and saying, but I have this really great project and I think it's really going to help you. How can you not want us to do this research? Well, that's not for you to ask. I mean, I can't think of a good analogy, but I remember once a friend of mine, his girlfriend broke up with him and he was just crushed, and he felt like, oh, how could she not want me? I'm such a, I mean, he had a little bit of an ego problem, but he's like, I'm the total package. You know, I'm the perfect guy. You know, why would she not want me? You know, what I told him was, you know what, maybe she's in the market for a Mercedes and you're a Cadillac. You know, there's nothing wrong with Cadillacs. They're beautiful cars. It's just Cadillacs aren't her style. Well, it's the same thing with tribal communities. You're going in and saying, how can you not want this Cadillac? You know, the tribe might be like, you know, Cadillacs are great for other people, but what we really want is a monster truck. You know, so if you can help us get that monster truck, then we can talk, but you need to do for us what we need. So I'm going to stop with my analogy there, because now I'm just thinking about, you know, Bigfoot going end over end, you know, at the monster truck rally. I'm happy to see that Will has joined us, and I'm sure you want to give him the opportunity to speak.
Yes, it would be nice for me to stop laughing with the image of a monster truck in my mind. So thank you for that, Shasta. Yes, we have been joined by Will Madrigal. I'm so excited. If you could both briefly introduce yourself and then also kind of respond to the concepts of wisdom and reciprocity when working with tribal communities. Thank you for joining us, Will.
Yeah, thank you, Achma. Neneta William Madrigal Jr. Nakutanga Kawiai Ayom Kawichum Nachai Pishintechwa Iva Ibitamit. And introduced myself in Kauai, member of the Kauai Band of Indians, a federally recognized tribe in Anza, California, and I currently reside on my wife's reservation on the Palma Indian Reservation. I'm coming to you from there. And I apologize for any technical difficulties you may incur on the res. You guys know how it is. I mean, usually I'd be on top of the house on the roof to get the best signal, you know, or I go to somebody else's house, you know, whoever has the best signal on the res, but we do what we can and we work with what we have, right? And I grew up on the reservation my whole life, and I grew up going to all the Southern California reservations, talking to my relatives and getting insights about what we later called climate change and climate change disparities. Back then, it was more just about survival, and so you know, I'm going to touch on what limited knowledge that I know about the science of climate change. I'm more of a cultural practitioner, traditionalist. My doctoral thesis is actually on accurate portrayals of the history of the Kauai people in Southern California with respect to traditional ecological knowledge, survival techniques, and socioeconomic impacts to the greater region of what is now Riverside, San Bernardino, San Diego County, one of the most populated areas in the world as far as population, and just more and more people want to come out here and live out here. So my job is to try to impart to them as an educator the best knowledge that I have available regarding what our condition is as Native people and who we are. And so that's why about a year ago or so, I joined the Climate Science Alliance as the Tribal Partnership and Capacities Program Manager. And I was very humble and fortunate to be able to represent not only my own people, but work with 20, 30 different tribal entities within Southern California and beyond. So it's been some great conversations over the last couple of days, and I can't help but want to mention, being an educator and working in academia, constantly around folks who are non-native gatekeepers of knowledge. And so what tends to happen with that is through these disciplines like anthropology and archaeology and mainly anthropology, and because they call themselves the experts of Indians and things like that, there's always hasn't been a common we've never seen eye to eye. And so I think one of the first things we need to recognize is that wisdom flourishes through reciprocity, is what I really strongly feel. But reciprocity can't happen, and therefore, if reciprocity can't happen, wisdom cannot be accessed. And so that's why I think the relationship between the two concepts is in the Native perspective. And so when I teach language and I teach California Indian history, whether it's Indian law or I really stress that and try to emphasize that concept that we really have to fight for our voice in not only the academic arena but the public arena, and to gain the trust of the public as well, and vice versa, right? I think Shasta touched on it and a few others, is that there's this big chasm of mistrust that exists. And so when I got with the Climate Science Alliance and became a staff member there, I went about trying to remedy that and come up with different ideas about collaboration, but most of all trying to find common ground with experts in the fields of climate science, those who have statistical data, who are the gatekeepers of that data, just like anthropologists are the gatekeepers of our records, our ethnographic records, and our history. So how can we recognize that through learning the history, but also, try to develop strategies that will allow this type of collaboration where we come together as equals, and where we lend both of our expertise to come up with pilot projects that we can implement both short-term and long-term. And so through our tribal work group at the Climate Science Alliance, which has roughly 70 members from across Southern California, Central California, and even other states, and even down into our relatives down in Baja, we've been able to kind of work through that and come up with some really effective strategies. And one of those strategies includes letting tribes voice their concerns and giving them the reins to develop and design these projects that we can then support with research expertise, and that we can empower our Native college students at various California college campuses to come in and get real world experience working with tribes. And so what the Climate Science Alliance had started, and then I jumped in on, was the Connecting Wildlands and Communities initiatives and the resiliency and restoration initiatives. And so what we've been working on over the past couple years, and for me it's been about a year, is trying to put all the pieces together in order to bring not only youth and non-Indians and non-Indian professionals, but our culture bearers, our elders, those that we hold precious and dear, those who have been impacted the most by this COVID epidemic, right? We've lost countless elders to this, COVID across the board. Again, we need to continue to persevere and remain resilient as Native nations and continue this work. So I find solace in the work that I do at the Climate Science Alliance, but also in my own communities, trying to lift them up by teaching the culture, the wisdom that was imparted to us, right? And the culture of our stories, our songs, our dances, our ceremonies. I mean, they're so much more important now than ever because of the impacts of COVID-19 and the political changes and things like that going on the world that affect us all. And so what I found was this unique synergy or nexus of synergies at the Climate Science Alliance organization that allowed me to use the tools that I have and the limited, knowledge that I have to contribute to those that already there as a part of the tribal working group entity. And it's been a great experience working with our staff at CSA, the tribal professionals, the natives and non-natives, and also our elders and culture bearers. And so that is probably the most definitive example of reciprocity that I've ever been a part of. And through that reciprocity, we have enjoyed the wisdom that has flowed, the knowledge that has flowed freely between all those involved. And that comes into fruition with these projects and implementing these projects and ideas that will have lasting benefits and effects to combat these climate change disparities that we are really having a hard time wrapping our heads around even. Tribal communities have limited resources, they have limited staff, they have even more limited funding to do what they can to address these disparities. I come from a tribe that's only about 500 people enrolled total. That's with kids and adults. And the reservation itself has always lacked the infrastructure, the capacity, and the funding to get a lot of the programs implemented that we need. But when we come together with the Climate Science Alliance and other entities like it, we're able to create this network where wisdom and reciprocity live and thrive. And then most importantly, we're able to share that experience and all those connections with those who are in most need of them. So with the Climate Science Alliance Tribal Working Group, our mission and goal is to ensure that we listen, that we are diligent, and that we are always trying and striving to create collaborative ways and strategies to give tribes the agency and voice that they need, that they critically need to voice their concerns, to share the wisdom that they'd like to impart in order to understand the unique problems that they are trying to work around and work with on their reservation communities that are specific to them. And so what we try to do is we try to meet those goals and those requirements through funding support, through technical support, bringing together our academic colleagues and our advisors that we have to try and design the best projects and pilot projects and things like that, but also allowing tribes to lead that effort and lead that project. Because there's, as we mentioned, I think somebody mentioned earlier that, it seems like all these projects have been prescribed to tribes, whether it's social, economic, environmental, cultural projects that are constantly being thrown at tribes, and we're tired of that. I'm tired of that. I'm ready to work with folks who will listen intently and meaningfully to our history, right? And our voice, and giving us that agency to engage with a partner in a meaningful way. And that's what the Climate Science Alliance is trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I'm particularly drawn to the quote about wisdom flowing through reciprocity. Like, I really want to put that as a tagline at the end of my signatures. That's really good. I really love that. That's beautiful. Everything was great. And now I want to ask the panelists all a question. From listening to everyone, can you please, we have some time left. Can you please share a time where you were able to listen to, learn from the wisdom of the youth that you work with? Just share a time with us. And anyone can go first. I can also start calling names. So I'm going to pick on Celso.
I knew it.
Yeah, you knew I would, because we work together. Just, for everyone to know, we work together with youth, with discussions around environment. So I know he has something to say.
Yes, so one of the things about our climate adaptation plan that I wanted to include was the two perspectives of the ones that have lived, the elders. I myself, I don't know how to consider myself, because I'm going to be 70. I don't know what that means. So I'm not an elder, I'm not sure. But, and then I wanted to share that perspective from them. And then I wanted to hear it from the young people who are actually going to have to make the decisions about how they're going to deal with the future. And so, so the first thing, one of the things that I had to do, so we at Barbecue High School, which is the central high school, we collected over 500 of our middle and high school students. And I introduced myself, we introduced the PowerPoint about climate science and who I was. And they were surprised because they never thought that there was an autumn. That's our people. I have 3 degrees in science, and I have a PhD in environmental toxicology, which is right appropriate for what we're trying to do. And so I had to gain their trust that I'm a tribal member. I went to school, and that I care for them. I care about them. They're my grandchildren. And so when I got past that stage, we took them, we put them all out with a mentor, and we put them with a paper and everything. And they for 4 hours, they came back and they presented what they wanted to protect and what they thought was valuable. And so in our climate adaptation plan, we have a section just for them, to hear what their feelings and thoughts were. And the funny part about it, which I appreciate, is that they weren't scared of my knowledge about science. They wanted to test me, and I think that was the fun part. But the older people, when I talk to, here's the other contrast, the older people, because I'm older, I know my stories about creation and destruction, about our people. When I took this discussion to them, they were ready for the discussion. They knew about climate change. They knew in our history, our culture, we have a story about, a destruction story about what will happen, what's going to happen to us in the future when non-autumn come into our land. And so they were not surprised that we're in climate change. they just said, yeah, we heard, our people have said through the storytelling that it was going to happen. So it's really good to see the contrast of the elders, myself included, and our storytelling and how we accepted our position now. And then to talk to young people, they were kind of scared about the future, but they weren't scared about the science, which was good to me. That's what I got from them. They were willing to step up to the challenge of science. They wanted to know. So from both sides, the elder and the young, the discussions that we have are I learned a lot about myself, about where I fit in with my people. And now I'm dedicated to trying to get the youth to understand that the future is theirs and that I will be around long enough to help them when they start going into when we start going into these drastic changes. Right now we're going into climate change. It's happening, but I'm talking about when we get into the reality on a desert. We're in a desert. The average temperature is about 115 degrees during the summer. 2030, they project that to be 10 degrees hotter. And what I tell them is that, hey, we lived through all of this stuff. We lived through the Spanish, the Mexican, the American invasion. We lived through hardships without electricity. We're going to be here. We just got to believe it. So anyway, that's my focus on the youth. They responded.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I knew you'd have good sharing. Shasta, how about your experience working with youth over at Paula?
So this is a loaded question for me. No, not in a bad way. I don't have children, and I'm terrified of children. It's like a phobia. I see kids and I'm like, uh-oh. And they're fine. They're cute, but to me they're like cute baby wolves. If there's enough of them, they'll just like bowl you over and they'll chew you up. So I don't know why that is. Oh yeah, and I see Kurt just put in the chat that I'm lying and that I love kids. Kids do make me nervous, and I think part of the reason that they make me nervous is because the kids will tell you exactly what they're thinking, and I'm not always prepared for that. So when I have interacted with the kids here in Paula, and I basically just talk to them like I would talk to a grown-up, and what you get from them is what you get. But what I find with the kids here and just kids anywhere is that they have their own kind of wisdom, and it's the wisdom that comes from not having been ruined by the world yet, which is so incredibly cynical, and I'm sorry to say it that way, but they know what's going on. Kids are not unaware, and when they're afraid, that they're afraid. And so what it's taught me is that I have to be strong for the kids. And I feel a lot of, I don't know if empathy is even really the right word, but I am not happy with adults right now, because in this climate space, there's a lot of talk about the youth, and I completely agree, with Celso, the kids are the ones that are going to have to deal with the consequences of our inaction. And so, we need to be aware of that. But I think there's a lot of pressure on kids where we say, hey, you guys are the ones who are really going to face the consequences. And so we're counting on you. The youth are going to figure it out. The youth are going to work together. The youth are going to fix it. That's a hell of a burden to put on children. And so that's the thing I try to remember when I'm talking to them is not to say, you know what, you guys are going to handle it. You're strong, you've got it. What I want to say to them is, I've still, if I'm lucky, if I live to be as old as my grandma who lived to be 95, I have 45 years left to keep working with you. I'm not going to make you do this. We're going to work together. And, and that's the message I want to give to them. because they come to us and they say, you're the grown up, what are you going to do? And I want them to know that even though they scare me, I still want them to have a better world, and I will work with them. I'm not just going to sit back and say, your turn. So that's kind of where I am. Those of you with kids, I'll just close with this. You are heroes. You know, I have a hard time managing my cats, and I can't even imagine kids. So you guys are the best. Thank you for taking one for the team.
Thank you, Shasta. I will say this, I work a lot with youth, and for me, youth is kind of like 30 and under. That's just my perspective. If I could have given birth to you, you're a youth. And so I think that this generation is really something. I think they will absolutely 100% tell you what it's about with no holds barred. These youth are just really go-getters. I really enjoy it. For me, I enjoy them because of that. So I understand why it also could be scary for other people. Respect. So Cynthia, can you tell me about a time, whether it be a youth engagement program or just in general about working with the youth?
Yeah, definitely. And, I can definitely agree with Shasta's sentiments. I myself don't have children, but I do have 17 nieces and nephews. And I believe my parents have like 12 great grandchildren now. So we do have quite a bit of kids that, I've been a part of raising and whatnot. So I definitely agree that they will tell you the truth and they will tell you what they're thinking, and they're very bold and upfront, which I think is really good about that interaction and engagement with them. And I know through our work, my work not only at the Pueblo but with the New Mexico Tribal Resiliency Action Network is really trying to figure out how do we be more interactive and engageful with our Pueblo and tribal youth, especially around issues of climate change. But more importantly, again, breaking it down and really allowing them to see, feel, hear, and understand what these climate impacts are versus just showing them those predictions. Yes, I definitely understand it's imperative to understand the scientific terminology, but when we're meshing that with the wisdom that these youth have developed or learned or gained because of that reciprocity from their grandparents and just those traditional teachings, I think it's imperative just to recognize it in that fashion. So I know, we've definitely been engageful as NM-Tran and myself as a director, during like 8 Northern Indian Pueblo Council's Tribal Environmental Youth Camp, where we presented climate change information and like little, scenarios and stuff like that, and having them work through them as far as what they would do if they were tribal environmental professionals, similar to the work that we do now, and how they would address these issues. So I think one of the good things about 8 Northern's Youth Camp is that we create these scenarios that we deal with on a day-to-day basis and allow the youth to navigate through how they would be solution seekers and problem solvers, because that's, I think, where we're trying to get all of us to be is, we recognize, the colonization, the genocide, and all these different, disparities and craziness that has happened to us as Indigenous peoples. But I firmly believe in this day and age, by working with our youth and through that multi-generational span, that we can create a change and rephrase the way that we talk about ourselves, and really to build that capacity, so that way, not, as Shasta I think said, not telling the youth, oh, this is your problem, now you deal with it, but again, collectively working together across those generations to identify ways that we can build that collective capacity to address issues of climate change, look at these mitigation actions against drought, against flooding, against catastrophic wildfire, against the impacts to our infrastructure within our pueblos, especially those historical buildings that have been there for quite some time, and enabling our ability to be able to bounce back and to be able to adapt in these different circumstances that we're now seeing and feeling and hearing about across the span. That I think, looking at youth in that capacity, I think only builds our collective network of what we're trying to do as far as enabling our own resiliency from within our community out. The other thing that I know that in connecting with their youth is that they do understand, you know, we have quite a bit of youth in Santo Domingo, Pueblo, and other Pueblos that still practice traditional agriculture, you know, that know what it means to go out and clean the Indian ditches, which were there before the acequias were and before Spanish colonial rule. So they have an in-depth understanding. And as place-based people, it's that connection to our Mother Earth that I think allows for that wisdom to resonate through our spirit, through our blood, through who we are, and to give back that essence of reciprocity, to heal our Mother Earth, and to enable our youth to be the solution seekers and the problem solvers, and to really create that atmosphere of climate hope.
That's wonderful. You know, something you said was about multi-generational learning. And I think that's really, really important. Even if you're going to target a youth program, having different people from different generations to learn from is really critical in Indian country. I occasionally have run some statewide American Indian youth camps. It's called Protecting Our Land. And we found out really quickly that instead of, I'm in my 50s, instead of responding to us at our age, at this middle age, we would have our youth respond to a panel of elders, and they talk to them entirely differently than they talk to us. So that multi-generational learning and being together is critical to working with tribal communities. So thank you so much for bringing that up. So I know Will said that he's an educator. I would super love to hear some discussion from you about engaging and working with youth.
Yeah. I don't think we can stress enough, right, how important it is to mentor our youth, especially with the work that we're doing. And I was fortunate enough to grow up with my parents who knew that it was important for me to know all of my relatives, especially those who could impart knowledge. And so my childhood was spent going to all the elders' houses and meeting them. I was really young and not really understanding everything they were saying, but absorbing that wisdom. And that wisdom flourished into reciprocity later on when I got older. I was able to impart that knowledge of our language, our history, our bird songs, our California Indian bird songs, right? And really try to impart the same foundation that I had received growing up. And I noticed when I started, going to college that foundation was really, really helpful in grounding me, especially going into the Department of Anthropology and becoming an archaeologist, because I was imparted, or it was kind of given to me to take on that responsibility for my community. But I realized real early on that how hostile anthropology is and still is. But I persevered. I made it through almost dropping out of the program because I really I really felt like I needed to get this education for my community. And it was through their support that I was able to complete it and start to practice as a professional in the field. But now, in my doctoral work in Native American studies, involving youth in this work has become so much more vital. And I think that some of the best strategies, even if we don't know, are already being practiced by individual families on the reservation who practice their cultural ways. Whether it's, for us here in Southern California, it's gathering our plants and our medicines and our foods year round. And it's something that takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of time, especially parents with large families like me. I'm the oldest of 9 kids in my immediate family. So it was vital to our survival to gather our acorns and gather our piñon and our other foods and medicines, right? To have available for us in case, one of us got sick, So I think that very, practice is vital to addressing climate change disparities, because these areas that we visit and frequent are more and more familiar. And so that when we grow up, when we're older, we tend to keep an eye on those areas and the changes that affect them, whether it's, widespread wildland fire, effects, or if it's golden spotted oak borer that kills the tree, right? Other diseases and things that affect these trees. We're monitoring these throughout our lives. And so I think we're in a better position to suggest, and get more collaborative, solutions to the table as practitioners. And then we can convey that to our leadership, our council people, our chair people, and try to get the best support expertise in from, from climate scientists and things like that. But an example that I wanted to share with you all today was a very recent example of lifting up our Native youth who are in college and getting those tools, as undergrads. There's an undergraduate kid that I mentored at UC Riverside when he was an undergraduate. He was interested in environmental science and traditional plants and traditional medicines and things like that. And he graduated and is now in a graduate program. And through our connections, we were able to get him an internship at the Palma Farms down here at the Palma Indian Reservation, which is it's a 90-acre farm where they're growing everything from olives to vegetables, produce, organic livestock. It's all organic. One of the few tribal farming, sustainable farming, carbon sequestration farming facilities, owned by Southern California tribes. So the Palma Tribe had acquired this land roughly 10 years ago. And it started out, as a meager project, but now has flourished and now is able to make connections to our youth in ways of teaching carbon sequestration farming techniques and traditional plant use and traditional foods and things like that. Food sovereignty has become more and more of an important discussion with the youth. They're starting to understand that better and better as we are as adults and as educators. And so it's been really refreshing and really fun to be a facilitator at the farm and speak directly to the youth about tribal food sovereignty and what that means and how that's going to carry us into the future. And I think that I'll end with the quote, the famous slogan from the Seventh Generation Fund. The executive director there is Tia Oros Peter. She's a very dear friend of mine. Her and her husband, Chris, and their slogan is to be a good ancestor and to warrior up, right? And so I like to fall back on that when this work gets, bogs you down or wears you out or gets overwhelming, right? And especially when tribal politics threaten the production of what we're trying to accomplish and trying to get in the way and try to distract you. And it's the youth really that are going to be able to persevere and rise above in order to be good ancestors themselves, right? And I think that we need to keep that in mind when we are doing this work, and we need to convey that, especially to our non-Indian supporters and allies, is that this is why we do what we do. And this is why it's so important that traditional ecological knowledge is at the forefront of the design of all these climate change disparity projects. And we can't leave out our elders, and we can't leave out our youth. And we need to remind each other that that's important.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Just if you wouldn't mind for a second, can you define food sovereignty for anyone out there who isn't familiar with the term?
Yeah, I could try. I tend to think of it as, you know, exercising an aspect of sovereignty that we forget about or that's been suppressed for so long. The whole fact that throughout our oppression and throughout our 500 years of colonization, we've we've experienced so much trauma, but I think one of the most important traumas is taking away our food and our medicines, right? Being isolated onto a concentration camp called a reservation, and then being given, you know, this bleached, you know, sugar foods, you know, unnatural processed foods, right? And not even getting enough, you know, but having to endure, you know, whole generations of disease and death. So food sovereignty is our ability as indigenous peoples to be resilient and to reclaim our foods and reclaim our food growing spaces, right? And so we do that in a traditional way, and in a nuanced way, you know, with support from our tribal collaborators and our non-Indian collaborators. So I tend to try and convey food sovereignty as an empowering, community empowering effort. And it can be a small effort, or it can be a huge communal type effort. Whatever it is, you're empowering yourself and you're empowering your community, your youth, your elders, your tribal leadership, your government, everybody who is taking part in that. So you can't just keep that to yourself. You can't just gather, you know, by yourself all the time. You have to include others. You have to include your extended family and even those who are not directly related to you, you know. And so we've had quite a few programs that support that and encourage that. So that's food sovereignty to me is everything from sustaining our ways and sticking it to the man. You know, it's it's so important, it's so vital, and it's so empowering. And we need to do more of it. We're starting to get the idea that we can do it in so many different ways, but we still need to do more of it, and we need to share resources across nations and across boundaries and state lines and things like that. And it's starting to happen through this climate science type of work and climate adaptation planning and things like that. It's happening. So it's very, very hopeful. And you know, we like to talk about climate hope here at the Climate Science Alliance, because we need to maintain our hope and we need to spread that hope to others in order to keep everybody motivated and moving. So that's, yeah, how I would define, you know, it's very multifaceted food sovereignty, but most importantly, you can do it in little ways, you know, and it starts with just one act, one practice. Go out there and gather your foods, your medicines, your acorns, your mesquite, and you will find that it will empower you and your community.
Thank you so much. You did a very succinct job of food sovereignty, which is completely related to climate adaptation, about wisdom and reciprocity in the community. Perfect way to end this session. Thank you everyone so much for joining in on such a great conversation. We're going to be going into break, and I'll see you for our final panel.